My name is Sean, and I'm an alcoholic. And that's the end of the facts. All the rest of this stuff is my opinion, and I'm not a spokesman for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not an expert on alcoholism. This sign is funny. I know none of you have ever heard bad words or used them. I all had a little too much sacramental wine and came right from the convent here, didn't you? It's really nice to be asked to be here in Santa Maria. Santa Maria is very special to me. There's a lot of people here who are very special to me, and my wife and I have been here before, and it's great. And you may wonder why another jerk would come up here from L.A. You know, I came up here because I get about 3 hours of country western music. I mean, you don't. That's one of my secret obsessions. I know I don't look like somebody who would listen to country western music, but I do. And I found a terrific Chinese restaurant here, so life is perfect. You know, there's nothing wrong with my life. There was a great deal wrong with my life before I got here. I drank a little. I also was of a generation that made drug abuse middle class, so I used drugs a little, just strictly, you know, medicinal, of course, and for spiritual reasons mainly. But there you have it. I am part of the group that tried to turn ourselves into toxic chemical waste dumps, and succeeded beyond our wildest dreams for the most part. I started getting drunk when I was 14 years old, and I had several legitimate reasons for it. My father was a drunk. God, I'd love to pin it on the old man. You know, I really would. I'd love to join one of those little 12-step programs that make it his fault, you know. Unfortunately, he never suggested that I drink a quart of scotch a day. He didn't think it was a terrific idea for himself. He certainly didn't think it was a great idea for his oldest son. So he's not the reason that I'm a drunk. Damn it. The reason I'm a drunk is that I drank like a pig. That's why I'm an alcoholic. You know, it's real simple. No mystery to that. When I was 7, now, the first night that you know, I'd been raised in this crazy household, and I'm Irish Catholic, and I'm weird, and I was secretive, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that was going on. I was highly uncomfortable all my life, and when I was 14 years old, I discovered comfort. Southern comfort is what I discovered. And if you're on your first drunk and you drink 5 tumblers, you're 14 years old, and you drink 5 tumblerfuls of Southern comfort, save your Confederate money, boys, the Southern will rise again, and it did. And so, you know, my worst day sober is not as bad as puking through your nose, which is what I did the first night I got drunk, you know. It's got a kind of burning memory for me that night. You know. That is about the only thing, because there was a whole gap of it that I didn't remember, and that happened every time I drank. I was a blackout drinker from the beginning of my drinking until the end, and I never even bothered to ask anybody about that, because I thought everybody who drank didn't remember parts of it. After it started being 2 or 3 days of that sort of thing, you know, I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, you know. I'm not stupid. I'm sick, but I'm not stupid. When I was 17, my mother became concerned that I was working too hard during exam time. I have never worked too hard during any time in my life, but she was concerned, so she gave me one of her diet pills. God bless that woman. Because up until that point, I had been a lousy drunk. I mean, I got real drunk on very, very little, real fast, you know, but boy, when I dropped those amphetamines, I could stay up all night and drink it all. It was just terrific, so I added that to my chemistry immediately. I wasn't stupid. When I was 18 years old, I declared myself an alcoholic, and I didn't know that I had done it, but I had said the phrase that only an alcoholic says. Now, if you're new and waffling, or if you're just here to see what we're like, let me tell you, if you've ever said this phrase, you're a drunk. If you've ever heard anybody say it, you're looking at a drunk, and that phrase is, I can control my drinking. Only an alcoholic says that phrase. Social drinkers never deal with the concept. Social drinkers, if they do something foolish, stop drinking. You ever notice it? It's weird, but that's what they do, you know. But I was 18 years old. I'd been getting drunk for 4 years. I'd been taking drugs for a year, and I was in trouble with the chemicals, but the prospect of living without them was even more terrifying. And that's alcoholism. That's what alcoholism is. There's an even simpler definition of alcoholism. You can do the test tonight if you want to. The simplest test for alcoholism is, if you have a drink, do you want another one? You don't even have to have it, but do you want it? See, I've lived for 18 years with a non-alcoholic. She's an Al-Anon, but she's a non-alcoholic. She has a half a glass of wine and never wants any more. Never even thinks about it, you know. we had a dinner party a couple of months ago, and and it was some friends, some business friends. So we bought a bottle of wine. They like a little glass of wine, so they had a little glass of wine. Well, about 3 or 4 days ago, Bonnie said, "You know, I really should have some of that wine before it turns to vinegar." There was 3/4 of the bottle of wine still in our refrigerator. That amazes me. I mean, I can't understand that. I don't know how anybody does that, but she does it. I don't. The other thing about my wife that is interesting is occasionally she goes wild and has a half a glass of wine. And I'm real good. I mean, we're usually at a spiffy French restaurant, and she'll order a glass of wine, she'll drink half of it, and I usually get to about the time when the check is paid, because I've gotten very cool over the last 13 years I've been sober, but I try, but I can't quite ever get out of the restaurant without saying, "Are you going to finish that?" And occasionally, if she's in a really wild, bizarre mood, she will finish it. She will have an entire glass of wine, and then we will be driving wherever we're going after the restaurant, and she will say, "I'm loaded." Now, I have lived with that woman for 18 years, and she has to tell me, because I can't tell. I absolutely can't tell. She is exactly the same before the glass of wine as she is after. Unbelievable. It is unbelievable. Now, when I have a drink, they know in San Diego that I've had it. I transform. I turn into another human being, and that's why I did it. That's why I did it. I hated everything about me. I was unable to cope in the world that I was stuck in. I can't deal with reality on any kind of successful basis. But when I drank, I got to be another human being, and that's why I did it over and over and over again. So I was 18 and in trouble with the chemicals, so I started doing recipes. Now, I did recipes from then on. I tried different chemicals. I tried different combinations of chemicals. There were all kinds of things available to me. So I did a whole lot of stuff. I became a daily drinker when I was 20 years old, and I did it until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous 13 years ago. I never stopped drinking. I knew I couldn't. I didn't see any point in setting myself up for that kind of failure. I was perfectly willing to cut down or space it, but I was not going to quit. And this is the first time that I've ever been sober. So if you're here and you're new, you only have to do this once. And believe me, there are lots of reasons why I stay sober. There are lots of reasons why I stay sober. My life is terrific today. It is beyond anything I ever dreamed of it. I mean, I have good days and bad days, and I live with unresolved problems. I mean, I don't want you to think, that I just kind of skip through life here. I mean, I have been handed some tools here that allow me to not only cope with my life, but if it enhanced my life on a just fantastically. But one of the reasons, believe me, one of the reasons that I stay sober is that if I were to drink again, I have never been a social drinker. I don't know what that means. I'm not interested in it. I would either die or go insane, or I would have to come back here, and I never want to have to get sober again as long as I live. It was the worst experience of my adult life. I hated getting sober. It was so horrible for me that I've stayed sober. And I'm real glad about that, See, one of the things that happened to me 13 years ago when I got sober, it was just before the medical profession and the insurance companies discovered we were big business. So we didn't have any of those spiffy places around, We were about the last crop of newcomers that we shook it out in rooms like this. Or we went to something called 12-step houses that sounded like something out of Oliver Twist. And we're the last batch that they gave half a cup of coffee to, because we were a little jumpy when we got sober. Perfectly nice, a little coming off of God knows what, And also we're the last, about the last crop of porcelain cups. I kind of lament the passing of porcelain cups. Porcelain cups were great, I developed a taste for styrofoam now, so, I can't even drink coffee without styrofoam. But they had porcelain cups, so they made newcomers wash cups. It was great, it was terrific because you absolutely could not wash 400 cups without saying something to the guy next to you. And that was important because I couldn't do anything like that when I got sober. Now, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had done everything that I could to avoid coming here. I had everything that keeps a nice young man from being a drunk, believe me. I owned a house in the Hollywood Hills. I have a very pretty wife. I had a pedigree dog, a Mercedes-Benz, a spiffy wardrobe, a couple of jobs. I had several national commercials running on television. I'd always been cast as a nice young man next door. I had been paid $300 for a day's work as a model about 4 days before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had been to psychiatrists, religions, I'd married above my station, I had a couple of friends, a little money. I mean, I had everything that keeps you from being a drunk. The only thing was is that I could not drink and use drugs. And what had happened the night before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous on April 23rd, 1974, was I had been arrested by the West Hollywood Vice Squad on this sleazy little charge. I had been taken down and fingerprinted and photographed and released on my own recognizance with the front of my pants from the waistband to the knees soaked in my own urine. And that got my attention. And what happened is the night before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a series of what I suppose are spiritual awakenings, but I saw some stuff very clearly about my life. One of the things that I saw was that there was an enormous gap between who I was and who I wanted to be. And I couldn't see any way to bridge that gap. I couldn't see any way to become the kind of person I wanted to be. I was pretending to be the kind of person I wanted to be, but there was no way that I could actually be. The other thing that I saw very clearly was that somewhere along the line I had committed suicide of the soul, that my pilot light had gone out, and that I also saw very clearly that my life as I understood it was over, but I was not going to die. And I never want to feel like that again as long as I live. And what I said to myself is, for the first time in my life, I put together my behavior with drinking, and I said, I wonder if I'm an alcoholic. That's the incredible thing about us drunks, is our unbelievable ability to overlook overwhelming evidence, you know. And then I said, I hope to God I am an alcoholic, because if I'm not, I'm hopelessly insane, because I had done everything that I could do to not be. I'd been to shrinks and religions and groups and therapies and spiritual literature and everything, you know, and if it wasn't alcoholism, there wasn't any hope for me. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous hoping to God that I belonged here, and embarrassed that I did, you know. I took aside a woman that I'd been working with for a year. She had 6 years of sobriety, and she was in this fellowship, and I said the last phrase to her. I said, I'm an alcoholic, and I have 20 minutes before I go to pieces. And she dropped everything, and she 12-stepped me. She told me her story. She read to me from the big book. She made a whole bunch of phone calls, and she took me to my first meeting, and I have been coming back ever since. I thought that I loved Alcoholics Anonymous from the moment I walked in. I have always mistaken my emotions. I didn't love Alcoholics Anonymous from the moment I walked in. But what I did feel at my first meeting, and something that I have felt at every meeting since, is I felt safe. And I mistook feeling safe for loving. You know, it was as close as I'd ever gotten. But I felt safe. I knew that I was understood and accepted in this room. I knew that whatever I would have to do in order not to drink, that you would be here and available to me. And I am so grateful for that experience. I am so grateful I came into Alcoholics Anonymous that way, because if I'd have come in through somebody who was saying they were going to be there for me because they were pulling down $1,400 a month, I would have doubted their sincerity, you know. But I knew you were here. You were not paid. You were not pros. You were drunks. And you made it very clear to me that the reason you were here for me was to save your own ass, and I thought that was a perfect trade. I mean, that kind of pragmatic trade-off was absolutely fine with me, because I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with the kind of deep cynicism we all come here. I was looking for the angle. I was waiting for you to turn on me. I was waiting for the check, you know. When was I going to have to pay the tab? What were you actually up to? You probably wanted to jump on my bones, or you wanted my car, one or the other, you know. And you were consistently there for me. I mean, absolutely sincere, absolutely, your experience was available to me, and I'm really, really grateful for that. I got a sponsor immediately when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you're new, get one, because the program doesn't make any sense. It does. Didn't to me, you know. Now, I'm a real smart fella. I'm a real bright guy. Whenever they gave us any of those tests in school, I was way up there on reading comprehension. You know, I'm a real smart guy. I've lived all my life under the crushing burden of potential, you know. They've all said, you're so bright if you just apply yourself. And screw you, I'll have another drink, yeah. Rather dazzle in the bullshit than actually achieve anything, for God's sake. And so I am so bright that I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, of course. And I read all your literature. I mean, I read the big book. I read it immediately. I mean, it was badly written and rather simplistic, but I read it all. I read all the pamphlets, all the literature, and I knew exactly what you were talking about. I could see the direction of sobriety and the thrust of the 12 steps. I could see the dynamics of sobriety. I mean, I knew what you were trying to do. I just couldn't figure out how to get it down into my gut, you know. So what I did was I found a guy who could translate it into terms that I could understand. Now, getting sober is like this. This is what getting sober is like. Getting sober is like coming to out of a blackout, stark naked, in the middle of the town square of the capital city of a third world country. That's what it's like. Yeah? You don't know who these people are, you don't understand what the hell they're talking about, and all you want to do is get out of there. And, in those kind of circumstances, I would be interested in the first available guide. I wouldn't care if it was the richest guide, the smartest guide, the best-looking guide, just somebody who knew how the hell to get out of there. And that's what I did. I grabbed onto a sponsor, and thank God I didn't wait to choose the sponsor that would be appropriate for me, because I would have chosen a lunatic, because that was the only thing that I could possibly relate to, Instead, what happened is this little guy who worked for the Parks Department, who had a little wife and 4 children, was my sponsor. And what happened is that he sat next to me at my first meeting. He sat next to me at my first meeting, he reached over and he shook my hand and he said, "I'm not a psychiatrist, but if you call me tonight and you tell me how you feel, and I tell you how I feel, probably neither of us will have to get loaded." And I started talking to him, and he started telling me his story. And he had done everything that I had done. It was absolutely amazing. It was my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It was the first night that I was sober and I had a spiritual awakening. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. Now, if you're new, let me tell you something. The old-timers in Alcoholics Anonymous keep going on and on and on about rigorous honesty. They're real big on rigorous honesty, and they lie to you like rugs. And the way they get away with it is they say, "More will be revealed." Now, I didn't find out until 3 years later that I had been set up. What happened is the afternoon that the woman was 12-stepping me, she kept jumping up from her dining room table and running out of the room, and I assumed that she was one of those ones with kidney damage, What I found out 3 years later was that she was going into her bedroom and making phone calls from her bedroom to all these people who were to be my new best friends and my new sponsor, and all these people that I was just accidentally run into at my first meeting, including my sponsor. The reason my sponsor had all these experiences that were exactly the same as mine is as I was telling my story to Suzanne, she was telling it to him over the phone. Well, when I found out that I had been set up, I'd been talking to the guy for 3 years, and he knew so much about me, I couldn't be bothered to go out and find another one. This one had all the info. Anyway, I also had a new best friend in Alcoholics Anonymous when I arrived in my first meeting. His name was Rich, and we were put together the way they put together things in Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason we were new best friends was that I had a car, and I could drive, and Rich didn't and couldn't. And Rich couldn't talk, and I couldn't shut up. So that's what we did. We went to AA, and Rich had been sober forever. He had 6 months. And, yeah. See, I got 13 years of sobriety. I'm not much good on a 12-step call anymore. What I do on a 12-step call now is I go in and I make beds and I clean up apartments and do all that kind of housework while somebody with 6 months of sobriety talks the guy into coming into AA, because they can't relate to me. I got 13 years. When somebody would say 13 years of sobriety when I first got sober, I would just shut down. I couldn't relate to it. It didn't make any sense to me. But if somebody said they'd been sober for 6 months, I want to know how they did it, because that seemed like it could be possible. Believe me, if I'd known I was going to be sober this long, I would have done it better. I really would have tried to be a much better example for you. But there you are. I just wasn't planning on it. I really bought that one day at a time thing, My friend Eve March, who's got 40-odd years of sobriety, says if you don't drink and you don't die, you get 40-odd years of sobriety. So anyway, we started going to these meetings, and he started teaching me the 12 steps, and I started taking them. And I started taking them rapidly because I'm not the kind that makes this program. I'm too cute, and I'm too bright, and I got too much going for me, and I understand that I have this little drinking problem, but let's keep it light. And so they recognized very early that they were going to have to get me entangled real fast, and they were going to have to force-feed the 12 steps. They were going to jam it down my throat because they didn't have any time to explain it to me. And thank God for that, We didn't sit down and have long discussions so that I would understand the steps before I took them, or that I would know the ramifications of the results of them. I just had to take them. And the wonderful thing about the sponsor that I had been set up with was he drank worse than I did. He's smarter than I am. He has a spiritual program that I will never attain, and he's meaner than I am. And he's one of those AA nuts, He was one of those guys who would talk about alcoholism in public restaurants, And unfortunately, I was so relieved to find somebody who knew what, who understood me that I blurted out everything to him, you know. So he would give me a direction, something to do, and I'd say, well, I'm not sure. And he'd say, well, remember the time you went for it? And I would, okay, I'll do it. You know. And so I made lightning progress, you know, just whipped right through those steps because I just didn't want to deal with him. And so if you're looking around for a sponsor, look around for one that kind of vaguely terrifies you. It's not a bad position to be in. For instance, I was 3 weeks sober when the little son of a bitch turned on me and said, I mean, he'd been real helpful up until then. I had to go through this court thing and everything, and he looked at me and said, you've got 3 weeks to do your 4th step. Now, I was 3 weeks sober. I didn't know you couldn't do your 4th step. You know, I didn't know you couldn't do one that was publishable, something with scope and depth, you know, an important 4th step. So I did mine, you know, and he gave me 3 weeks to do it, and I did it. And when I was 6 weeks sober, I took my 5th step, and it was fearless and it was thorough. It was absolutely right on the money. It was exactly what the big book talked about, and it achieved exactly the result that was there for me. And what happened was it was my entry into Alcoholics Anonymous. I actually was in Alcoholics Anonymous because of that. I had done the step that separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls, the wheat from the chaff. I mean, I had done the riskiest thing in the world, which is take the first intimacy step, which is to tell you who I am and ask you for what I need, you know, and that's what intimacy is. And that's what I did. And I didn't feel any kind of instant relief, nothing, but I knew I was in the fellowship of the Spirit. And I liked that. And I kept proceeding rapidly with the 12 steps. I sponsor guys now, and I insist that they do the things that I can only sponsor people the way that I was sponsored. I mean, I can't sponsor people theoretically because, you know, that's the only thing that is the only commodity that saves lives in Alcoholics Anonymous is sober experience. All the rest of the stuff is great fun to talk about over coffee, but the nuts and bolts is how have you gotten through something sober? How did you do that? That's the only thing that saves lives around here. And the way that I was sponsored and the way that I sponsor is if somebody asks me, I say, well, before you ask me, let me tell you what I do, and that is you go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Within the first month, you get a commitment at a meeting, you know, sweep floors, make coffee, whatever. You read the big book, you read the 12 and 12, you underline it, treat it like a textbook. We talk on a daily basis, and you work at least the first 9 steps in the first year of sobriety. You don't make any emotional decisions in the first year without talking to me, and we'll see how it goes. And that's how it went for me. And I mean, he laid that all out to me, and I said, okay, you know. I mean, it didn't seem as bad as some people were having to do, so I thought, okay. One of the things that I wanted to do when I first got sober was that I felt the most loving thing that I could do would be to divorce my wife. We'd been together 5 years, and I felt there was entirely too much damage, and it was better that we go our separate ways and start our new lives. And he said that I was not to make any emotional decisions in my first year of sobriety, and I said, what the hell does that mean? And he said, that means you're not going to divorce your wife, you're not going to fall in love with anybody else, you're not going to get a new house, you're not going to change jobs, you're not going to buy a new car, you're not going to buy a new sofa, you're not going to redecorate, you're not going to quit smoking, you're not going to lose 35 pounds, you're not going to start jogging 15 miles a day, you're going to put your entire life on hold, and you're going to work the 12 steps, and you're going to get sober, and it takes about a year. And I said, but you don't understand. I said, I'm not sure that I love her. And he said, I don't care about love, work on good manners. She went to Al-Anon a week after I got sober, and we're still married. And if we had done what we wanted to do when I first got sober, I would have lost that woman out of my life. And I'm deeply grateful that I recognized a couple of things about Alcoholics Anonymous. I recognized that it was a safe place to be stupid. And believe me, I needed something like that because I had been spending my life making up answers because it was too risky to ask the questions. You know, I developed attitudes instead of emotions. You know, I was desperately afraid to ask you to help me because I knew that if I did that, you'd throw me away. And so I acted like I knew what I was doing. And the only way you can really maintain that if you've got the kind of personality I can is chemically. I mean, the only way you can maintain that kind of, when you don't know what you are doing, is to stay half bagged all the time. And I did, and I achieved some notable success. I mean, I stand before you with a, you know, I did 5 Broadway shows. I've lived a kind of really exciting life. I got drunk with Judy Garland in penthouses. Sir Noel Coward made a remark about me that rippled through the Broadway theater world one season. And, Katharine Hepburn gave us our wedding reception. I mean, I've been around the block, you know. The only trouble was that I was dangerously naive about the most basic elements of life because I had never learned them, and I'd never asked anybody about them. And I recognized here that if I could cut through this ego that was killing me, I could finally find out the information that would enable me to live some kind of successful life. That I could ask the dumbest questions here, and somebody would answer them. And I was deeply grateful for that. And I have asked the dumbest questions here, and there's always been people to answer them. They talk about surrender in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I didn't know what that was. I had it all mixed up with humiliation and defeat, which of course it felt like at first. But it is a process whereby we solve problems in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it has 3 parts. 2 out of 3 don't count, I have found. If I don't do all 3 of these things, I remain with the problem. And the 3 parts of surrender are honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. The honesty in Alcoholics Anonymous is out loud honesty. That's the important factor about the honesty in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to be willing to tell you exactly what's going on. I got to state the problem out loud. It has never done me any good to state the problem to me. I mean, I've had an inner dialogue going on all my life. I am incapable of solving my own problems. You know, I've always known what the problems were. I just couldn't do anything about them. So I got to tell you what the problem is. The open-mindedness part is I got to listen, open my mind to your sober experience. Like I said, I can pass on your religious dogma or your psychological theories, but I got to listen to your sober experience because that's the truth. It is absolutely the truth. It may be more true for you than it is for me, but it is the truth. And I must listen to it. And then the willingness is I got to be willing to do what you tell me to do. There's a great, if you knew, I got some more bad news for you. They talk about this program being a suggested program, and that always makes me laugh. Because the suggestions in Alcoholics Anonymous are along this line. This plane is on fire and about to crash. We suggest you jump out. And then we suggest you count to 10, and then we suggest you pull the ripcord. Of course, it's up to you. So I have taken the suggestions in Alcoholics Anonymous as gospel. I have been told what to do. I was so nuts when I first got here that they didn't even bother, they didn't even bother with me trying to make a decision. I mean, they didn't have time. They didn't have time for me to sort it out. I mean, when you took away my anesthetic and I was newly sober, everything in my life was a decision. Everything was a decision. I would stand at the street corner and would say, walk, don't walk, and I'd have to call my sponsor. I mean, I didn't know what shoes to wear in the morning. I was just berserk, but awfully pulled together and trying to be as desperately charming about it as possible. But, I mean, things were just beyond me to do. I mean, it's just amazing. It didn't stop. It came back every once in a while. I was 3.5 years sober, and I was going to talk one time at a meeting, and I had to drive somewhere, and it was about 6:30 at night, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed with no pants on, absolutely frozen, just... So I picked up the phone, and I called my sponsor, and I said, I got to go talk, and I don't know what to wear. And my sponsor said, put on a white shirt, the striped tie, your blazer, your gray flannel pants, your gray socks, and your penny loafers. And I said, okay, and hung up the phone and did that and went off and spoke. Now, I mean, the availability of that resource, it just astounds me. It's just so wonderful. I'd still be sitting there if I hadn't made that phone call, I mean, now, some people may find that humiliating, but I thought it was fantastic. I mean, the access that I got to the information that I need at the moment just blows me away. Absolutely blows me away, and I make use of all the resources that are here. The first three steps I took rather rapidly in Alcoholics Anonymous. The idea that I admitted, see, that's the honesty part, the out loud honesty. Admitted I was powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. Not decided that I was powerless over alcohol and my life had become unmanageable. Not thought that I was powerless over alcohol and my life had none of that. Told you, I am powerless over alcohol, it don't work, no more, help. That's what the first step is. And thank God for that. I mean, my life was unmanageable and I didn't know why. I didn't know why I couldn't make it. I could make it happen. I just couldn't make it work. Why it was not coming. it wasn't coming together for me until years into sobriety when I got a chance to look back, because let me tell you, and if you're new and you're listening to people from the podium, I don't think I'm here because, not because I'm unique, but because I'm typical. And all my insights are hindsights. I mean, I used to sit there and think, I'd be sitting there 6 months sober, and somebody would be talking about what they were going through 6 months sober, and I think, how do they know that? Well, I didn't know that they didn't know what they were going through 6 months sober until they were about a year and a half sober. And they looked back and said, oh, that's what I was going through. Well, that's how we work it around here. Anyway, I didn't find out the reason my life was unmanageable was that every decision that I had ever made was a defensive decision. I was living my life defending myself against you. Somewhere long before I drank, I decided it was me against you. And I decided if I accumulated the right things, if I had the right woman, the right car, the right job, the right place, the right things, you couldn't hurt me. You couldn't hurt me. I don't know why I was making decisions that were defensive. I was this walled fort, What happened is I became my own prisoner and my own jailer. There was an inside of me that was saying, you've got to let somebody know you're in trouble, Sean, and there was an outside that was saying, don't you dare let on, because if they find out, they'll throw you away. Now, under those circumstances, it is impossible to lead a functional life. It is impossible. It is impossible when you're spending all your energy defending yourself against, against enemies that aren't there. So that's why the first step is in there. The second step is, came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. Now, I am an arrogant SOB. I try to be as charming as possible about it, but that is true. And my arrogance tells me that the only power greater than me is God. There's me, and then there's God. I'd like to thank you for your input, but I'm talking to God today. What I've come to find out is that somebody with 20 minutes more sobriety than me is a power greater than me. This room is a power greater than me. The big book is a power greater than me. The 12 steps are a power greater than me. Collectively, Alcoholics Anonymous is a power greater than me, and they are all there and designed to lead me to a power that I need to find out about. An actual God, not a manufactured one. And could restore me to sanity. Now, I'm a nice upper middle class drunk, and we don't go to funny farms. We don't go to any of those nasty places. We go to therapists and talk about stress. And they give us medication. So I had a little trouble with that insanity thing, because I had never, I thought insanity was rubber rooms and paper slippers and no doorknobs on this side, heavy duty stuff. You hear in Alcoholics Anonymous meeting people saying, I'm so insane. Well, come on, I got a friend of mine who had been in a lot of those institutions, and he said, I've been in those places where the inmates eat their own eyeballs. That's insanity, and that had not been my experience. So it took me, so I had a little trouble with the second step until I was taking Rich to a meeting. He and I were going to a meeting, and we were going to Rodeo on Friday nights in Beverly Hills, which is a very spiffy meeting. I mean, probably none of us are well dressed enough to go there. And Rich had thin hair, so he used to kind of torture it forward and shove it over to the side and spray the hell out of it. And because you got to look good if you're going to go to Rodeo. So while he was doing that, which took an inordinate amount of time, he had a great big huge medical dictionary on his desk, and I started flipping through it. Quote, a seeming inability to learn from one's mistakes, close quote. Sociopathy, it is the repetition of the same action over and over and over again, utterly convinced that this time the results will be different. I took the second step right there, and I clearly qualified. My entire life had been circular. I mean, I kept coming around to these things. I've been here before. Oh, yeah. I recently looked up a definition of sanity. You know what the definition of sanity is? The ability to assess and appraise the reaction to one's actions, to appraise how people are going to react to you. That's sanity. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I never knew anything like it. I just tore through my life. To hell with what you thought of it, So anyway, I took the second step. Now, the third step is made a decision to turn my will and my life over to God as I understand Him. Now, I had a little trouble with that because, see, I had been raised an Irish Catholic as opposed to a Roman Catholic, and my wife was raised a Polish Catholic, and she says there is a difference. And by the time I was 24, I had broken every one of the 10 Commandments, which is a biggie for a former altar boy, you know. And it's when I became spiritually lost, because in my incredible ability to solve problems, I figured out that if I couldn't practice my religion, I didn't have a God. And my disease really took a nosedive. And so I became an agnostic. I love agnostic. I was an agnostic out of convenience, not out of conviction. The reason I was an agnostic was that I was in deep trouble with God, so I decided to demand further proof of his existence. Yeah. One of the things that I did have to concede, though, to my sponsor when we talked about this was that every time that I was handcuffed, the first thing out of my mouth was, "Oh my God," you know. So there was something going on there. Not, you know. I also had learned those 2 alcoholic prayers. These, you got to do these real sincere. Let me see if I can get it up. Wait a minute. Okay. The first one is, "Dear God, get me out of this and I will never do it again." And the second alcoholic prayer is, "Whew." So my sponsor told me that, now if you're new, I got some more bad news for you. First of all, there's no spiritual side to this program. This is a spiritual program. The entire thing is a spiritual program. These are spiritual principles that we live by, and it's not a religious program, but it is a spiritual program. You will find it if you're looking for religion here, oh boy, are you in the wrong room. This is a highly irreverent approach to spirituality here. Thank God for that. I mean, you know, it's the only way I could have found it. But anyway, so my sponsor told me that I was going to have to search for God on a daily basis, that I would probably never find God, but I was to do it on a daily basis. Now, if you knew, you get to call God anything you want. Third law of thermodynamics, force of nature, gravity, higher power, we don't care. You know, I just call it God because it's easier to say that than dear third law of thermodynamics. You know, just much shorter. So anyway, he told me I was going to have to pray, and I said, "Oh, you know, come on, you know." He said, "Yeah, on your knees because you're one of the arrogant ones." And I said, "What?" Yeah. He said it was harder to give God orders when you were kneeling. It's a, you know, it's a humble position. So I would get up in the morning. This is my spiritual life, my first 6, 8 months of sobriety. I would get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, and lock the bathroom door and get down on my knees and say, "Okay, God, keep me sober and let me know what you want me to do today." Okay. Look around, unlock the bathroom door, and walk out. Then at night, I'd go and lock the bathroom door and get down on my knees and say, "Thank you, God, for keeping me sober." And then unlock the bathroom door and walk out. I left the bathroom door open when I puked, but I locked it when I prayed. God forbid the Shih Tzu should see me pray, you know, our pedigree dog. And nothing happened. I mean, nothing happened. I totally ignored the fact that I hadn't had a drink and a drug in 6 months, you know, but nothing happened. My wife wasn't crazy about me. As a matter of fact, when we first spoke at a meeting together, and she talked about Al-Anon and I talked about AA, one of the things that she said was that my first year of sobriety was worse than my last year of drinking. I was really upset with that. But anyway, I thought I was doing terrific, you know. I'd go to an AA meeting and say, "I paid the gas bill," and I get a standing ovation, you know, and I come home and tell Bonnie. I said, "Big deal, I've been paying the goddamn gas bill for 5 years. Those Al-Anons, you know. I get unhappy. She needed a lot of work. She really did. So anyway, I was 6 months sober and nuts. You know, one of the things about psychiatrists who know anything about alcoholism and have any ethics at all, it's a rare combination, but there are a few. When the diagnosis becomes alcoholism, what they do is they say, go to Alcoholics Anonymous, get a sponsor, work the 12 steps. If you still have these psychological disorders, come back after a year of sobriety. They know that you cannot double diagnose an alcoholic in his first year of sobriety, because an alcoholic in his first year of sobriety manifests every psychological disorder known to man. You take away our anesthetic and you got a Looney Tune on your hand. And that was certainly true of me. I mean, I was going off like the 4th of July. You know. And when I was 6 months sober, I was nuttier than I had ever been in my life. I was manic depressive. I was either or contemplating suicide, you know. I was paranoid. I knew there were large groups of AA meetings discussing me, you know. Social psychopath, schizophrenic, and I had developed an eating disorder. That's one of my favorite double diagnoses. I developed an eating disorder. I gained 35 pounds in my first year of sobriety because I was consuming gallons of ice cream. When you stop consuming gallons of vodka, you got to replace the sugar somehow. So you start. How I did it was with gallons of ice cream. And I was going to meetings every day. I was talking to my sponsor every day. I was working the 12 steps. I was writing up my amends list. I was driving Rich and other people to meetings. And most afternoons you could see me driving up and down the Hollywood freeway in a three-piece suit in my Mercedes, screaming at the top of my lungs. And when I wasn't doing that, I was taking naps. Now, I don't know about you, but I tried as best I could to sleep through my entire first year of sobriety. If I couldn't get loaded, if I couldn't get out somehow, I was going to get out any way that I could figure. And so I was a functioning alcoholic. I had a wife who worked, and it's thrilling coming out of an afternoon nap and seeing your Al-Anon just home from work, staring down at you. Are you ever going to get up? It was wonderful. But anyway, I was 6 months sober, and I was trying to take a nap, and I couldn't. I was absolutely furious. And I looked up at the ceiling, and I said, I don't believe in you, and I think you're a jerk. I cleaned it up because of the sign here. And then suddenly it occurred to me, if I didn't believe, who was I yelling at? Yeah? And then being a good ex-Catholic, I waited for 3 weeks to see if I was going to get punished for calling him what I actually called him. And I didn't. As a matter of fact, some things got better. What happened is that, and I didn't know this at the time, it wasn't until months and even years later, but that event shattered a very old idea of God that I had been carrying around. An idea of a God that was out there and up there. And what started to form was that perhaps I was carrying around some kind of little microchip of God within me. That maybe there was something going on in here. That maybe my connection was internal. And that I should start perhaps looking for it in you. Because maybe I could connect somehow, because I had never been able to connect with organized religion. And so what happened was, see, I'd been raised in a tradition that if it wasn't Lourdes, it wasn't a miracle. So what I decided to do was lower my standards on miracles. And I started coming to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and listening in a very different way. I started listening to you talk about making quantum leaps as human beings that were impossible. I started listening to you talk about relationships that had been shattered that were reforming, about families coming back together again, about jobs being held, about becoming functional human beings with people who that was an impossibility for. And I would gather every one of those little pieces of sharing up and stick it in my pocket like a squirrel gathering nuts to shore up a non-belief, because I still didn't believe. I was going through it. And see, that's how I worked all the 12 steps. I did all the 12 steps before I believed they would work. I didn't have time to wait until I was ready to do them. If I'd have waited until I was ready to do them, I'd be drunk today, or dead. I did everything before I was ready to do it. I did it assuming that eventually it would catch up, that I would change my behavior first and then the feelings would change. And that has happened. That has happened. And so what happened is I started gathering up this stuff. And after a time, I came to believe. I actually came to believe. And a couple of years later, I came to trust. It took a little while, until I had gathered up some of my own sober experience to see that there was something going on in my life that was beyond my intellect, that was beyond anything that I was able to manipulate or make happen. And so I started to trust. And then several years later, practicing this on a daily basis, I got interested. I got interested in God. I'm now fascinated with the workings of God. I no longer need to understand. That's beyond me. I'm not bright enough, and I'm a fairly bright fella, but there's no way that I can understand. But what has happened is that I'm able to accept, and that's what we need to do here. And if you're having a little trouble with this whole kind of stuff, my kind of journey has taken me to some beliefs that have helped me. I was dying under the concepts of right and wrong because I was incapable of doing them. There's something terribly wrong with me. I just can't quite act like normal people can. I don't know quite how to do it. So I had to take another tack to it. And the way that I approached all this kind of trouble that I was in with other people, my relationships with other people, was I decided on a daily basis as part of my 10th step is that I would look and see and try to do more things that I personally approved of than what I personally disapproved of. And I started kind of putting my life on that basis, trying to do more things that I approved of than I disapproved of. And what happened is taking that kind of an approach to it is I found out eventually that I got a fairly normal kind of moral sense. I mean, I approve of what's right in the general sense of society, and I disapprove of what's wrong in the general sense of society. And what has happened to me is, and through you and your irreverence and your, you've taught me God in the weirdest ways. And what I've come to find out is that God doesn't care whether I'm drunk or sober, and God doesn't care whether I'm good or bad. God just cares. There's just this endless resource of hope and love and trust for me, and it's been there all my life, and all I got to do is tap into it. That's all. I just got to tap into it. God loves me not because I'm good, but because God's good. That's the nature of God. God doesn't have any choice. And what that has enabled me to do, it has enabled me to make the final transition that we all really have to do here, the working of the 12 steps. By the time I had worked the 9th step, the promises started to come true in my life and have been coming true ever since. They don't come true until the 9th step is completed, I have found. The fullness and the richness of them. And the entire working of the 12 steps have enabled me to get to the point of forgiving myself. Now, that was an enormous thing for me, and I think it's an enormous thing for anyone who's sitting in this room as an alcoholic, because I don't know how to do it. I didn't know for years how to do it. But I did all the stuff that you asked me to do. I took the steps, I did all the things, I tried to repair the damage I had done in my relationships. I tried to just kind of get even with the rest of the world as far as being on the same kind of plane, not better or worse than, and try to maintain that kind of thing. And what I have found that until standing here tonight at this podium with you people in this place, I have done the best I could with the equipment that I had. If I'd had any better way to work the 12 steps, if I had any other spiritual concepts or principles to apply, I would have applied them. If I'd have known how to live my life any better, I would have lived it better. But I didn't know. And so that doesn't let me off the hook for the damage I've done, but it does let me off the hook for beating the hell out of myself for not having the knowledge that I needed to live. And that has really been helpful to me. And so what I've found out for me is that I don't believe anymore that there are good people or bad people. I just believe there are people who know and people who don't know. And I've been one of those people who didn't know for such a long time. For such a long time. And I have a hunger to know. I have a real hunger to know. And the only people who have ever been able to teach me are you. Because you are miracle workers. You're miracle workers because you have one phrase that none of the professionals have, none of the psychiatrists, none of the doctors, none of the judges, none of those moral superiors that we go to for help, none of the good people who are sincerely interested in us, who have studied us, and none of the ones who are making a fortune off of us. But you have the phrase, and that phrase is, I know how you feel. And I don't know if you know how extraordinary that is. I don't know if you understand how powerful that phrase is. But what that does is that enables me to start getting well. When I come to you and I say, this is what's going on, and you say, I know how you feel, then I can change. And it may be just as simple as that. You have spent 13 years reassuring me, and I think that's one of the things that we do for each other that nobody else can, because of our experiences. I believe the people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous and drink again are the ones who will not allow themselves to be reassured. I think it may be that simple, I would come to you and tell you that my life was impossible, it wasn't going to work out, my wife hated me, I couldn't keep my job, and you'd say, it's going to be all right. And I decided to believe you. It was probably an absurd decision, but it saved my life, And if you're new, maybe you have to do what I did. Maybe you've got to suspend your belief system. That's what I had to do. I had to stop it. I had to stop believing everything that I believed in until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, because it was killing me. And I had to start believing what you believed. And you believed that if I didn't drink and I didn't take drugs, if I went to meetings, if I worked the 12 steps, if I carried the message to other people, if I tried to find God, that I would be able to live without alcohol and drugs. And that has been true for 13 years. I've been an active participant in my sobriety since I got here. The first night that I was sober, my sponsor told me to pick up my ashtray and fold up my chair. And I did that because I was afraid of him. And I didn't understand that that was an act of love. I just did it. And I've been an active participant. He told me it was harder to fall out of than off of, that I was to be in Alcoholics Anonymous and not on it, that I was not to be anonymous in Alcoholics Anonymous, that I was to be an active participant in my sobriety, and that I was to give back freely what was given to me. And so I started doing that kind of stuff. One of the first things you asked me to do, because I was reasonably well dressed. I've always felt that a terrific sports jacket is suitable protection for anything, you know. And I was about a week sober, and they gave me a job at the Wilshire Normandy meeting. It was a great big huge meeting on Sunday nights in L.A., and it was terrifying. What I had to do was I had to stand at the door and shake hands. Now, if the Russians had told me I was going to have to stand at the door and shake hands, I would have given them the secrets to the atom bomb. But I did it because I was afraid you'd throw me out if I didn't. So I would stand at the Wilshire Normandy meeting, and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Sean," and I would shake your hand, and it was grisly. I hated it. It was a 6-month commitment. I did it. I hated every second of it. Now, one of the things about it was that I did it. The other thing about that is that I am shy. Now, I would like you, some of the things that I've done to overcompensate for that is appalling to me, but I would also like to think that shyness is kind of a psychological disorder. I would like it to be a mammoth disorder that I couldn't really do anything about. You know, maybe we should have an SA, you know, Shy Anonymous, you know, a 12-step program for it. But what I have found out is that shyness is simply extreme self-obsession. That's all it is, you know. That I am so concerned with my effect on you that I don't do anything, you know. So, but one of the things that I absolutely hate doing, and it hasn't, if you're new, there's some things that don't go away. I hate walking into rooms full of people. Even if I know every person in the room, I get scared walking into rooms full of people. I used to have 3 scotches before I left the house to do it, or I'd have a couple of joints in order to be calm enough to walk in the room. So I would say, "Hi," you know, and then get loaded. But and it hasn't gone away. I hate it. I hate it. And I get to talk in Alcoholics Anonymous a lot, and if you recognize my car, you will see me pull up into the parking lot and sit in my car for a few moments, and you'll think, "Isn't that wonderful? He's getting his spiritual message together." And what's actually going on is I'm sitting in the car saying, "You've got to get out of this car, Sean." They've seen you. You can't drive out now. And so what I do is I get out of the car and I walk up to the door of the meeting, and some poor jerk who has been bamboozled into this because of his sponsor sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, my name is Fred." And what he does is he takes my hand and he pulls me through the door. And he doesn't know he's doing it. That's an act of love. And see, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that, and they didn't tell it to me. They didn't tell it to me because they knew if they told that to me, I would gag on it, you know. So I have done all kinds of things in Alcoholics Anonymous and then found out what they were about later. And what they're about is learning to care for you. Because if I can care for you, I can care for me. And if I can love you, I can love me. If I can tolerate your mistakes, I can tolerate mine, and we can all grow. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love being sober. If it were any better out there loaded than it is in here sober, I'd be out there loaded. I am not stupid. I am interested in the easier, softer way to live the most comfortably and the most functionally I can, and this is it. If you're new, give yourself a break and brace yourself. This is the wildest ride you will ever go on. You will meet the wildest, the most incredible people you have ever met in your life. This is an equal opportunities disease, and this recovery is equal opportunity. I mean, I know the most amazing people. I went into business a couple of years ago with a partner, and we were putting together things, and he was saying, "Gee, we got to find out about this thing." And I kept picking up the phone and calling people. Whenever there was anything we had to do, I would pick up a phone. And he kept saying, and I knew doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. I mean, it was unbelievable, And he'd say, "What is this with you? I mean, every time we got a problem, you call somebody and get it solved. What's going on?" I said, "You'll never understand. Don't worry about it." I mean, I didn't want to blow his mind. But it is incredible. So if you're new, give yourself a break. Keep coming back. I love you.